I can remember when I realized about famousness, if that's a word. I noticed the dads in the neighborhood all came down to the end of the block and watched my dad and Butkus drinking beer on our front porch. And they just stood there and watched. Because Butkus walks on water in Chicago.
All right, so Paul, we're going to start years and years ago before you were even born. Your dad played football, went to high school with Dick Butkus.
Wow, you did your research.
I did. Well, what's it like even to be the kid whose dad knew Dick Butkus, played with Dick Butkus, and like what did you learn about what that was like for him?
It was a big deal because I grew up on the south side of Chicago. I was born on 104th Street. A couple years later, lived in the south suburb called Glenwood. And my dad was from a neighborhood called Hegwish and went to Chicago Vocational High School, CVS. And my dad was a senior when Butkus was a junior. And they played football together. He told me about Butkus. Everyone in Chicago knew about him. You didn't have to be I was a very little kid, though. But my dad and Butkus were pretty good buddies. And they signed each other's yearbooks. And their group of football friends attended all each other's weddings. And again, I was really young, but I do remember when Butkus came over to our house one time. My dad was cutting the lawn, and Butkus came over. And he was just this big guy who was my dad's friend, and he was huge. And he had been retired probably about 4 years at this time, if I remember right. And I can remember when I realized about famousness, if that's a word. I noticed the dads in the neighborhood all came down to the end of the block and watched my dad and Butkus drinking beer on our front porch. And they just stood there and watched. Because Butkus walks on water in Chicago, and especially in the late 70s. And but it was pretty cool. Like every once in a while we'd see him or some of his family members. And I went to a Bears game one time and I saw him working. I think he was working for WGN. And I was up in the press box with a friend and his dad. And I saw Butkus, he saw me, and he's like, "Oh, I haven't seen you in forever," and he bear hugged me and almost broke everything. My friend's dad was like, "Oh my God. Oh my God," like he was going to weep. He saw Butkus. So I don't have a ton of experiences with him. I did see him once when I was at ESPN. He came by and I hadn't seen him forever. But it was, that's a good chip to have when you're a kid in Chicago.
Oh, for sure. My dad's friends with Dick Butkus. Like that,
Yes.
that gets you very, very far.
Street cred.
Yes. And for those, hopefully our listeners all know Dick Butkus. Go read any story about him. It's like reading about Paul Bunyan. Almost when you read the stories.
Especially in the Chicago area because he played basketball and like I've got a picture of him on the basketball team and it looks like one of those movies where there's a bunch of skinny dudes and then there's Butkus with his man traps up to here and I still have all my dad's high school yearbooks and Butkus looks like a grown man and he's 16 and so he's a legend. He's a legend.
So you grow up with obviously the Butkus connection. Your dad played sports. You grew up a big Bears fan.
Yep.
I read also, and shout out to Nate Ulrich who wrote about you in 2009.
Oh boy.
I read that you were there when Walter Payton broke the rushing record.
Yeah, that's my all-timer. I grew up a Walter Payton fan. I consider myself upper echelon, committed to Walter. I don't take any back talk. I don't know if I could fight, but whenever someone says anything negative about Walter Payton, my head gets hot and I get like dizzy. Not that anyone is saying anything bad about him, but I asked for tickets to the Bears for my grandmother for my birthday, and this is the year Peyton was going to break the rushing record. And little Paulie Pabst tried to time it out. I was like, I think he's going to break it versus Dallas or something like that. And Dallas versus the Bears, I mean that's a great game always. And they didn't come to town that often. And I opened it up on my birthday like 3 weeks before. My grandmother accidentally bought me tickets Bears versus Saints the week after. And I was like, oh no. And I tried to smile. My grandmother was awesome. She loved the Bears and the Cubs. And then the Bears were playing against Dallas, and Peyton had like 100 yards at half. He needed like 80 in the second half to break the record. And I'm sitting at home watching, like, I have tickets to the next game. In the second half, he had like 5 yards for whatever reason. And the Bears were good, and they beat Dallas. And the next week, I went with my uncle and sat in the corner of the end zone way up high. And I brought my stupid little camera that I had, one of those little like Instamatics or something, and I had pictures in that end zone when Walter Payton went for the touchdown, but it was the second play, second half, and Walter broke the rushing record. And I can remember jumping around with adults. I was probably 13 or 14 at the time, and everyone's hugging each other and just celebrating because he was beloved in Chicago. And it's just one of my all-time luckiest sports memories that my grandmother got the wrong tickets, which ended up being the right day.